The day my son looked me in the eyes and said, "You gave me nothing," something inside me broke. But I didn't defend
I
myself.
trusted you. How
I
could
just
you lie
stood
straight to
there in
my face
small
like that?
kitchen,
Look at me when I'm
hands
talking to
still
you.
trembling from the dish I had been washing.
I don't care
and
what you
nodded,
think, Mom.
like maybe he
I
was
told
right.
you I wasn't going to let this happen
Because
again.
how do you explain a lifetime of sacrifice to someone who has already decided you're a failure? What he didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that everything he had, every opportunity, every success, was built on choices I made in silence. And I chose to keep it that way until the truth found him on its own. If this story touches something in your heart, please take a moment to like this video. And if you've ever misunderstood someone you love or been misunderstood yourself, I'd really like to hear your story in the comments. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It makes me feel a little less alone. I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Chicago, in a small aging house that most people would probably overlook without a second glance. The paint on the porch railings is chipped. The garden I once tried to keep alive now grows wild in uneven patches, and the mailbox leans just slightly to the left, like it's tired of standing straight after all these years. But it's home. It's the same house where I raised my son, Ethan Harper. The same house where I stayed up nights listening for his breathing when he was sick, where I taped his drawings to the refrigerator like they were priceless works of art, where I whispered promises to myself that I would give him a better life than the one I had. Now, most days, the house is quiet, too quiet. I wake up early out of habit, even though I no longer need to rush to multiple jobs like I used to. I make myself coffee in a chipped mug that says "World's Best Mom," a gift Ethan gave me when he was 8. I still remember the way he smiled when he handed it to me, like he had given me something truly important. I don't think he remembers that mug anymore. Ethan is 35 now. Successful. Polished. The kind of man people respect the moment he walks into a room. He works downtown, something in corporate law or finance, the kind of job that comes with tailored suits, glass offices, and a schedule that always seems too full for anything or anyone else, especially me. We don't talk much. It didn't happen all at once. Distance rarely does. It crept in slowly, quietly, like a draft you don't notice until the room is already cold. At first, it was missed calls. Then shorter conversations. Then conversations that felt more like obligations. "Hey, Mom, I'm busy. I'll call you later. Everything okay?" Yeah, just work." And then sometimes, nothing at all. I would sit at the kitchen table staring at my phone longer than I care to admit, rereading old messages just to feel like the connection was still there. But the truth is, I think Ethan started letting go of me a long time ago. The last time I saw him in person was about 3 months ago. He had invited me to lunch downtown. It was unexpected, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel hopeful. I remember standing in front of my closet, unsure of what to wear. I didn't have anything fancy, not really, but I chose my cleanest blouse, the one without any stains or loose threads, and a pair of shoes that didn't look too worn. I wanted to look presentable, not for strangers, for my son. The restaurant was one of those modern places with glass walls and soft lighting where everything looks expensive even before you sit down. I felt out of place the moment I stepped inside. People glanced at me. Maybe it was in my head, maybe it wasn't, but I suddenly became very aware of my hands, my clothes, the way I walked. Ethan was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He looked different, confident, sharp, like he belonged in that world. When he saw me, he stood up, gave me a quick, polite hug, and gestured for me to sit. "You found the place okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, smiling. "It's beautiful here." He nodded, glancing around like it was nothing special. We ordered food he chose for both of us without really asking what I wanted. I didn't mind. I've spent most of my life adjusting, making things easier for others. It felt natural. At first, the conversation was light. Work weather, small things. But underneath it, I could feel something else. distance. He checked his phone often. His eyes drifted away when I spoke for too long. There was a restlessness about him, like being there with me was something he needed to get through rather than something he wanted. Then at one point, the waiter came over and accidentally placed the bill closer to me. It was a small thing, but Ethan reacted quickly. "I've got it," he said, almost too fast, reaching for it before I could even look at the total. "I know you do," I replied softly. He didn't respond right away, just gave a short nod. And then, almost as if something had been building inside him for a while, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. He hesitated just for a second. Then he looked at me, really looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "Why didn't you do more?" The question hung in the air between us. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean..." He gestured vaguely as if the answer should be obvious. "Growing up, we struggled. A lot. And now that I see how things work, how people build careers, connections, I just don't understand why you didn't push harder. Why you didn't become more." There it was. Not anger. Not exactly. Something colder. Disappointment. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "I did the best I could, Ethan." He looked away, shaking his head slightly. "Yeah, I guess." But the way he said it made it clear he didn't believe that was enough. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur after that. I answered his questions. I smiled when I was supposed to. I nodded, listened, played my part. But something inside me had shifted. Or maybe it had finally broken. When we stood outside the restaurant, he gave me another quick hug. "Take care, Mom," he said. "You too," I replied. And then he walked away, blending back into that world where I no longer seemed to belong. I stood there for a long moment after he left, watching the reflection of the city in the glass windows, seeing myself faintly superimposed over it. Small, out of place, easily forgotten. That was the day I realized something I had been avoiding for years. My son didn't just see me as someone who struggled. He saw me as someone who failed. And the hardest part? He truly believed it. There was a time when Ethan didn't look at me with disappointment. There was a time when I was his whole world. I was 23 when I found out I was pregnant. I still remember sitting on the edge of a narrow bed in a tiny apartment on the south side of Chicago, staring at that little plastic test like it had just rewritten my entire life in a language I wasn't ready to understand. Daniel Brooks, Ethan's father, was standing by the window when I told him. He didn't say anything at first, just rubbed the back of his neck, pacing once, twice, like he was trying to think his way out of something that couldn't be undone. "We're not ready for this, Justin," he finally said. I remember the way my stomach dropped, not from fear of becoming a mother, but from the realization that I might be doing it alone. "Well, figure it out," I told him. I meant it. I always believed that if you cared enough, you could make things work. Daniel didn't share that belief. Within 3 months, he was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no final argument, just distance that turned into silence, and silence that became absence. The last thing he said to me was, "I'll send money when I can." He didn't. And just like that, it was me and a future I had to build from nothing. Ethan was born on a cold November night. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine, his breathing soft and fragile against my chest. In that moment, everything became clear. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I didn't have the option of failing. Because now, my life wasn't just mine. It was his. The first few years were a blur of exhaustion. I worked wherever I could, cleaning offices, after hours waiting tables during the day, sometimes taking on overnight shifts at a care facility when they were short-staffed. Sleep became something optional. There were nights I would come home so tired I could barely stand, only to find Ethan crying in his crib. I'd scoop him up, whispering soft reassurances I wasn't even sure I believed myself. "It's okay. Mommy's here." Even when I wasn't sure I had anything left to give, I gave it anyway. There were moments I still carry with me, small and quiet, but heavy with meaning. Like the time Ethan had a fever so high, I thought I might lose him. I sat by his bed all night, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, counting every breath, every second, until the sun came up and the fever finally broke. Or, the mornings, I would pretend I wasn't hungry, so he could have the last piece of toast. Or the nights I would lay beside him on that worn-out couch, reading stories from library books because I couldn't afford to buy any. We didn't have much, but I tried to make sure he never felt like he had nothing. As he grew older, I started noticing things about him that made all the struggle feel worth it. He was curious, bright, the kind of child who asked questions that made you stop and think. "Why do some people have more than others?" he once asked me when he was about 7. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes life isn't fair," I said, "but what matters is what you do with what you have." He nodded like he understood. And for a while, I think he did. School became his world, and I made sure it stayed that way. No matter how tired I was, I helped him with homework. No matter how little money I had, I found a way to get him the supplies he needed. I remember one particular parent-teacher conference when Ethan was in 3rd grade. His teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, smiled as she handed me his report. "He's one of the brightest students I've seen in years," she said. "He just needs the right opportunities." That word, opportunities, stayed with me because I knew what she really meant. He needed more than I could give him, and that thought, it terrified me. From that moment on, everything I did had a purpose. Every extra shift, every dollar saved, every sacrifice. It was all building towards something bigger than me. I started taking on more work even when my body begged me to stop. There were days I worked 16 hours straight, moving from one job to another, barely catching my breath in between. At the care facility, I would sit beside elderly patients in the quiet hours of the night, listening to the rhythmic beeping of machines, thinking about Ethan's future. I would imagine him in a different life, a better life, one where he didn't have to count pennies at the grocery store, one where he didn't feel the quiet embarrassment of wearing secondhand clothes, one where doors opened for him instead of closing before he even had a chance to knock. And I made a promise to myself. No matter what it took, I would get him there, even if it meant breaking myself in the process. Looking back now, I realized something. I never told Ethan how hard it was. I never showed him the nights I cried in silence after he fell asleep. I never let him see the fear, the doubt, the moments when I wondered if I was strong enough to keep going. Because I didn't want him to carry that weight. I wanted him to believe the world was full of possibilities, not limitations. And maybe that was my first mistake. Because somewhere along the way, in trying to protect him from struggle, I also hid the truth of what it cost. The first time Ethan asked me not to come to school, he was 13. I remember the day clearly, more clearly than I wish I did. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had just finished an early shift cleaning offices downtown. My hands still smelled faintly of bleach, no matter how hard I scrubbed them in the restroom before leaving. I had rushed home, changed into a clean blouse, and tied my hair back neatly. It was parent-teacher conference day. Those days meant everything to me, not because I had anything important to say, but because it was one of the few times I could step into Ethan's world, see his classroom, meet the people shaping his future. remind myself that all the long hours were leading somewhere. When I arrived at the school, the hallways were crowded with parents. Most of them looked comfortable, well-dressed, confident, the kind of people who didn't have to think twice about taking time off work in the middle of the day. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about me. It was about Ethan. I spotted him near his locker talking to a group of boys. He was taller now, his voice deeper, his posture more guarded than it used to be. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him, feeling that quiet swell of pride that never really went away. That was my son. I started walking toward him, lifting my hand slightly in a small wave. Ethan. He saw me, and for just a second something flickered across his face. Not joy, not even surprise, embarrassment. It was subtle, but it was there. The way his shoulders stiffened, the quick glance he shot at his friends, the way his smile disappeared before it ever fully formed. I slowed down. "Hey," I said softly when I reached him. "I didn't know if you'd be waiting." "Mom?" He interrupted, his voice lower than usual. "You didn't have to come." The words hit harder than they should have. "I know," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "But I wanted to talk to your teachers. See how you're doing." "I'm doing fine," he replied, a little too fast. One of the boys next to him glanced at me, then back at Ethan. "You didn't tell us your mom was coming?" he said casually. Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, well, I didn't think she would." There was something in his tone that made my stomach twist. "I always come," I said, trying to keep things light. "I wouldn't miss it." Ethan looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it. That distance. That quiet discomfort. "Can you maybe not next time?" he said, lowering his voice. "So his friends wouldn't hear." It is just, Ethan looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it. That distance, that quiet discomfort. "Can you maybe not next time?" he said, lowering his voice so his friends wouldn't hear. It's kind of weird. Weird. I felt the words settle inside me, heavy and unfamiliar. Weird, I repeated, not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't want to. "Yeah," he said, shifting his weight. "Other parents don't, you know." I glanced around without meaning to. Other parents. They were dressed differently, spoke differently, moved through the space like they belonged there. And me, I suddenly became aware of everything. My shoes slightly worn at the edges, my blouse clean, but clearly inexpensive, the way my hands looked rough from years of work. "I just don't want people asking questions," Ethan added quickly. "It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal." I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. "I understand." And in that moment, I made a choice. I wouldn't embarrass him. Not now. Not ever. "Go ahead," I added, stepping back. "I'll find your teacher on my own." He looked relieved. "Thanks," he said, already turning back to his friends. And just like that, I was no longer part of his world in that hallway. I spent the rest of the afternoon moving from classroom to classroom alone. His teachers all said the same thing. She was bright, capable, full of potential. "You should be very proud," one of them told me. "I am," I replied. But pride and pain have a way of existing side by side. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the same question over and over again. When did loving him start to feel like something I had to hide? It didn't stop there. That was just the beginning. Over the next few years, the changes became more noticeable. He stopped inviting friends over. He stopped talking about school. And when I asked questions, his answers grew shorter, sharper. Everything's fine. You wouldn't get it. Can we not do this right now? At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers pull away. They become independent. They need space. That's what everyone says. But this felt different. This wasn't just distance. This was rejection. I remember one evening in particular. Ethan was getting ready for a school event, a small ceremony where students were recognized for academic achievement. He had worked hard for it, and I had been quietly looking forward to attending. I stood in the doorway of his room, watching him adjust his tie. "You look so handsome," I said, smiling. "Thanks," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "He'll be there early," I added. "I want to make sure I get a good seat." He froze for a second. Then he sighed. "Mom, you don't have to come." The words felt familiar now. Still painful, but familiar. "I want to," I said gently. "It's important." He turned to face me, then frustration flickering across his face. Why he asked? It's not a big deal. "It is to me," I replied. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "You just don't fit there, okay?" The room went quiet. I felt something inside me crack softly, almost silently, but I felt it all the same. "I don't fit," I repeated. He hesitated, like maybe he hadn't meant to say it that way. But it was already out. "People will ask questions," he continued, avoiding my eyes. "About you, about what you do. And I don't want to deal with that." There it was again. Not anger, not cruelty, just shame. And somehow that hurt even more. I stood there for a moment, trying to find the right words, trying to say something that would make him see me differently. But nothing came. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to fix something he didn't think was broken. "Okay," I said quietly. And that was it. I didn't go. I stayed home that night, sitting in the same chair by the window, imagining him walking across that stage without me in the audience. I told myself it was what he wanted, that I was respecting his wishes. But deep down, I knew something else. Every time I stepped back, every time I made myself smaller to fit into the space he was creating, I was slowly disappearing from his life. And he didn't even notice. By the time Ethan turned 16, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I didn't change something, his future would look exactly like my past. And I refused to let that happen. It started with a conversation I almost didn't have. His guidance counselor, Mrs. Alvarez, had called me into her office one afternoon. I remember feeling nervous walking in, like I had done something wrong. That feeling never really left me whenever I stepped into spaces meant for people with more education, more confidence, more of everything I didn't have. But Mrs. Alvarez greeted me with a warm smile. "Justin," she said, folding her hands on the desk, "your son is exceptional." I let out a small breath when I didn't realize I had been holding. "He works hard," I said. "He always has." "He does," she agreed. "But it's more than that. He's ahead, the kind of student who could thrive in a much more competitive environment." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She reached into a folder and pulled out a brochure, sliding it across the desk toward me. It was for a private preparatory academy, one of the best in the state, the kind of school I had only ever seen from a distance. "I'm recommending Ethan for a transfer," she explained. "They have advanced programs, better college placement, more opportunities overall." I picked up the brochure carefully, like it might fall apart in my hands. "This must be expensive," I said quietly. Mrs. Alvarez hesitated just for a moment. It is, she admitted. But there are scholarships, financial aid. And she paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes there are donors who take an interest in students like Ethan. Students like Ethan. Bright. Promising. Worth investing in. I nodded slowly, even though my mind was already racing ahead. How much, I asked. She gave me a number. And just like that, the room seemed to tilt slightly. It wasn't just expensive. It was impossible. More than I made in a year. Maybe more than I could ever save, even if I worked myself into the ground. I understand if it's not feasible, she said gently. But I wanted you to have the option. Option. That word again. The same word that had followed me for years, always just out of reach. I went home that evening with the brochure tucked carefully into my bag. I didn't show it to Ethan right away. I needed time to think, to figure out how to turn something impossible into something real. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Ethan had gone to bed, staring at the numbers I had written down on a piece of scrap paper. Tuition, fees, books, uniforms. Every line felt like another wall closing in around me, and yet I couldn't let it go, because I kept thinking about what Mrs. Alvarez had said. He could thrive there. He deserved more. I looked around the kitchen, the worn cabinets, the flickering overhead light, the stack of unpaid bills tucked neatly in the corner, and I made a decision. I would find a way. No matter what it cost me. The next few weeks were a blur of conversations, applications, and paperwork I barely understood. I filled out forms late into the night, double-checking every detail, afraid that one mistake might cost Ethan his chance. Eventually, we were invited for an interview. The school was everything I imagined, and more. Tall buildings, perfectly trimmed lawns, students walking confidently between classes like they belonged to a world that had always been waiting for them. Ethan fit right in. I could see it the moment we stepped onto campus. His posture changed. His voice grew steadier. There was a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. This was where he was meant to be. During the interview, I sat quietly while Ethan answered questions with a level of confidence that made my chest swell with pride. The admissions officer nodded along, clearly impressed. At one point, she turned to me. "And what do you do, Mrs. Harper?" she asked. The question was simple, but it always felt complicated. "I work in cleaning services," I said, keeping my voice steady. She smiled politely, but I saw it. That slight shift in expression, the subtle recalculation. It wasn't judgment, not openly, but it was enough. When we left the office, Ethan didn't say much. He walked beside me in silence, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Did I do okay?" he asked finally. "You did more than okay," I said. "You were incredible." He nodded, but I could tell he was thinking about something else. A few days later, we received the letter. Ethan had been accepted. Partial scholarship. Partial. I sat at the table reading the number over and over again. It was still more than I could afford. I showed Ethan the letter that evening. "They want me?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "They do," I said, smiling. This is huge, Mom." "I know." He hesitated, then looked at me. "But can we afford it?" That was the moment where I could have told him the truth. That we couldn't, that it was beyond us. That life doesn't always give you what you deserve. But I didn't. "Yes," I said instead. "We'll figure it out." And just like that, I made a promise I didn't yet know how to keep. The following weeks were the hardest of my life. I took on extra shifts, more than my body could handle. I cleaned offices until my hands cracked from the chemicals. I worked nights at the care facility, barely sleeping between jobs. But even that wasn't enough. So I started making harder choices. I sold the small car I had relied on for years. I told myself I could manage with public transportation. It added hours to my day, but it gave me something more valuable. Money. I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. No new clothes, no small comforts, nothing. And still, it wasn't enough. That's when I met Margaret Collins. She was introduced to me through the school, someone involved in the scholarship program. Elegant, composed, the kind of woman who carried herself with effortless confidence. We met in her office, high above the city. "I've reviewed Ethan's file," she said, her voice calm and measured. "He's remarkable." "Thank you," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "And you're willing to do whatever it takes to keep him here?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer. "There may be additional assistance available," she continued, "but these things are often handled discreetly." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I just knew one thing. This was the opportunity I had been praying for, and I was willing to give up anything to make sure Ethan never had to know how close he came to losing it. Ethan changed the moment he stepped into that new world. At first it was subtle. Small things I could almost pretend not to notice. The way he spoke a little differently when he came home from school. His words more polished, his tone more measured. The way he started correcting himself mid-sentence, replacing simple phrases with ones that sounded more refined. Then came the clothes. The school had a uniform, but outside of that, Ethan began to care about things he never used to. Brand names, fit, style. He would stand in front of the mirror longer, adjusting his shirt, smoothing out wrinkles that I couldn't even see. "Do we have anything else?" he asked one evening, holding up a sweater I had bought secondhand. "It's perfectly good," I said gently. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." But he didn't wear it. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers change. They grow. They become more aware of the world around them. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just growth. This was distance taking shape. The school itself was everything Mrs. Alvarez had promised, and more. Advanced classes, extracurricular programs, college prep resources, opportunities I had only dreamed about for him. And Ethan thrived. His grades were excellent. His teachers praised him. He joined clubs, made connections, built a life that seemed to expand further and further beyond the small world we had once shared. I should have been proud, and I was, but pride has a strange way of mixing with fear. Because the more he belonged there, the less he seemed to belong with me. I started noticing how he talked about his classmates. "Ryan's dad works in private equity," he said one night over dinner. "They have a place in Aspen." "That's nice," I replied, stirring the pot on the stove. "And Chloe's mom is a surgeon, like one of the best in the city. That's impressive." He nodded, then glanced at me just for a second. And in that glance, I saw it again. Comparison. Not spoken, but felt. "What about you?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "How was your day?" "It was fine," he said quickly, already pulling out his phone. "Fine." That word became his default answer. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. The first time he didn't want me to pick him up from school, I thought it was about independence. "I can take the bus," he said. "It's no trouble," I replied. "I'm already nearby." "I know," he said, his voice tight, "but it's just easier this way." "Easier," I nodded. "Okay," I said. And just like that, one more small piece of my presence in his life disappeared. Soon, he stopped asking for help with homework, stopped sharing stories about his day, stopped sitting with me at the table long enough to finish a full conversation. Most nights, he would eat quickly, then retreat to his room, the door closing just a little too firmly behind him. I would sit there alone, staring at the empty chair across from me. wondering how something so full could suddenly feel so empty. The distance wasn't just emotional. It became physical, too. The more time he spent at school, the less time he spent at home. Study groups, events, weekend programs. "I'll be late," he would text. "Don't wait up." I always waited anyway, not because I had to, but because I couldn't quite let go of the habit of being there when he walked through the door, even if he barely noticed. One evening, I decided to surprise him. I had managed to get off work a little earlier than usual, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have dinner together like we used to. I stopped by the grocery store and picked up the ingredients for his favorite meal. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was something he used to love when he was younger. I cooked carefully, taking my time, making sure everything was just right. By the time I finished, the house smelled warm and familiar, like it used to. I set the table. 2 plates, 2 glasses. I checked the clock. 7 o'clock, then 8, then 9. Finally, my phone buzzed. "Don't wait for me. Eating out." No explanation, no apology, just distance wrapped in a few simple words. I stood there in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at the message. Then I slowly turned back to the table. The food was still warm. The chair across from me was still empty. And for the first time, I didn't tell myself it was just a phase. Because phases don't feel like this. They don't settle into your bones, quiet, persistent, undeniable. This was something else, something deeper, something that was changing the very foundation of our relationship. And the hardest part, I didn't know how to stop it. Weeks turned into months and months into years. Ethan grew more confident, more independent, more distant. By the time he graduated, he had built a life that barely included me. He stood on that stage, dressed in a crisp suit, receiving his diploma with the kind of pride that made my eyes fill with tears. I sat in the back of the auditorium, alone. I had debated whether to come. Part of me wondered if he would even want me there, but I couldn't miss it. I couldn't miss one of the most important moments of his life, even if I had to experience it from the shadows. After the ceremony, students gathered with their families, taking pictures, laughing, celebrating. I watched from a distance. Ethan was surrounded by people who looked like they belonged in his world. I hesitated, unsure if I should approach. But then he saw me. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I smiled. A small, hopeful smile. He nodded politely, then turned back to his friends. And that was it. No introduction. No, "This is my mom." Just a quiet acknowledgement, and then I was invisible again. I left before the crowd thinned out, before the photos were finished, before I could stand there any longer feeling like a stranger in my own son's life. That night, I sat in the same chair by the window, the same one I had sat in so many times before. Only now the silence felt heavier, more permanent. Because somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, I hadn't just given Ethan a better life. I had given him a life that no longer needed me. The first time Daniel Brooks came back into Ethan's life, I didn't know about it. Not right away. And maybe that was part of the problem. Because by the time I realized what was happening, the damage had already been done. It started during Ethan's second year at the academy. He was busier than ever, advanced classes, extracurriculars, networking events. His schedule was packed, his world expanding faster than I could keep up with. At first, I thought the distance between us was just a natural consequence of that, until I began noticing something new. A shift in the way he spoke, not just distant anymore, but certain. Confident in ways that didn't come from his own experience, but from something he had been told. One evening, He came home later than usual. I was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting like I always did, the overhead light, casting a soft glow across the empty room. "You're late," I said gently as he walked in. "Had something to take care of," he replied, setting his bag down. There was something different about him that night, a kind of energy, like he had discovered something important. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Actually, I met someone today," I looked up. "Oh." He hesitated just for a moment. "My dad." The words hit me like a sudden drop. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the edge of the table, but I kept my voice steady. "Daniel?" I asked. He nodded. "He reached out a few weeks ago." Ethan continued almost casually. "We've been talking a few weeks." He had been talking to him for weeks, and I didn't even know. "I see," I said quietly. Ethan leaned against the counter studying Jimmy. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," I replied. "He always said he might come back someday." That wasn't entirely true, but I wasn't about to open old wounds. "He's doing well," Ethan said. "Really well. Jimmy, you don't seem surprised." "I'm not," I replied. "He always said he might come back someday." That wasn't entirely true, but I wasn't about to open old wounds. "He's doing well," Ethan said. "Really well." There was something in his tone. Admiration. "He works in real estate now," Ethan added. "Owns multiple properties. Travels a lot." I nodded slowly, taking it in. "I'm glad he's doing okay," I said. Ethan watched me for a moment longer, like he was expecting something else. A reaction. Anger. Bitterness. Anything. But I gave him nothing, because I had learned over the years that my emotions often made things more complicated, not better. He said Ethan hesitated, then continued. "He always wanted to be part of my life. That things were complicated back then. Complicated. That word again. It always seemed to appear when someone wanted to soften the truth." "I'm sure they were," I said. Ethan frowned slightly. "That's it?" he asked. "You're not going to say anything else?" "What would you like me to say?" I replied calmly. "I don't know," he said, shrugging. "Just something." I met his gaze. "Ethan," I said gently, "if you want to get to know him, you should." And I meant it, no matter how much it hurt, because I had spent his entire life trying to give him more, and that included the choice to know his father, even if it meant losing my place in his life. At first, their relationship seemed harmless. Occasional calls, the occasional lunch. But slowly, it became something more, something stronger. Daniel had a way with words. He always did. He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to present himself. Confident, successful, charismatic. Everything I wasn't. And Ethan noticed. Of course he did. "Dad says connections are everything," Ethan told me one night. "It's not just about working hard. It's about knowing the right people." "That can be true," I said carefully. He also said, Ethan paused, then looked at me, that things could have been different. "If you had made better choices?" The room went still. I felt something sharp twist inside me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Did he say that I asked?" "Not exactly like that," Ethan replied quickly. "Just that you didn't really understand how to build opportunities." I nodded slowly. "I see." Ethan shifted, almost uncomfortable now. "I mean, he's not wrong," he added. "You've always worked hard, but that's not enough anymore. You have to be strategic." Strategic. Another word that didn't belong to the world I had lived in. I looked at him. really looked at him, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who held my hand, the one who believed I could fix anything. And then it was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as limited, outdated, less. Maybe he's right, I said quietly. Ethan seemed surprised by my response. You think so? He asked. I think, I said, choosing my words carefully, that everyone sees things from their own perspective. He frowned slightly, but didn't argue. And that was how it started. Not with a single moment, but with a series of small shifts. Conversations that planted seeds. Ideas that slowly took root. Until one day, those ideas became beliefs. And those beliefs became truth. At least in Ethan's mind. Over time, Daniel's presence in Ethan's life grew stronger. They met more often, talked more frequently, and with each interaction, I could feel my influence fading. Ethan began quoting him more, comparing more, judging more. Dad says I should be thinking about internships already. Dad thinks I could go even further if I position myself correctly. Dad knows people who could help me get into top firms. Every sentence felt like another step away from me, and toward him, the man who hadn't been there, the man who hadn't stayed, the man who now seemed to be rewriting the past. I never spoke badly about Daniel, not once, not even when I wanted to, because I didn't want Ethan to feel caught between us. But silence has consequences, and in my silence, Daniel's version of the story grew louder, stronger, more convincing. Until one day, Ethan said something that made me realize just how much had changed. I think things would have been easier, he said almost casually, if Dad had been around instead. I didn't respond right away. Because there are some words that don't just hurt. They echo. They stay. They reshape everything you thought you knew about your place in someone's life. I'm sure it would have been different, I said finally. And that was the truth, just not in the way he thought. Because what Ethan didn't know, what Daniel never told him, was that the life he was living now, the opportunities, the connections, the very foundation he stood on, wasn't built by the man who came back. It was built by the one who stayed, even if no one ever gave her credit for it. By the time Ethan entered his final year at the academy, I had learned how to live with the silence. Not accept it. Just live with it. There's a difference. Acceptance feels peaceful. This didn't. This felt like learning how to breathe in a room where the air had slowly been taken away. Ethan was rarely home anymore. When he was, he moved through the house like a guest, polite, distant, careful not to linger too long in any space that still belonged to me. Our conversations had become transactional. Did you eat? Yeah. Do you need anything? No. Okay. Okay. That word had replaced everything we used to say to each other. But behind the silence, something else was happening. Something I had set in motion long ago. Something I had buried so deeply that even I tried not to think about it too often. Until Margaret Collins called me again. It had been years since our first meeting. The one where she had offered additional assistance in that calm, measured voice of hers. At the time, I didn't fully understand what I was agreeing to. I just knew that Ethan needed that school, and I needed a way to keep him there. The phone rang late one afternoon while I was finishing a shift at the care facility. Justin Margaret's voice came through, smooth as ever. It's been a while. It has, I replied, stepping into the hallway for some privacy. I've been reviewing Ethan's progress, she continued. He's done exceptionally well. A small, tired smile crossed my face. He always does. Yes, she said, but now we're approaching the next stage. I felt my grip tighten slightly on the phone. What do you mean? College, she said simply. Placement, internships. The kind of opportunities that require continued support. Support. That word again, always wrapped in something heavier than it sounded. I've managed so far, I said carefully. You have, she agreed. But let's be honest, Justin. Not without help. I didn't respond, because she was right. Every year, the gap between what I could afford and what Ethan needed had been quietly filled. By her. By people like her. And always with conditions I chose not to examine too closely. There's an opportunity, Margaret continued. A program connected to one of our partner firms. It would guarantee Ethan a position after graduation. A very strong start. My heart skipped slightly. That sounds incredible, I said. It is, she replied. But it's competitive, and it requires commitment. I closed my eyes for a moment. What kind of commitment? There was a brief pause. The kind that says more than words ever could. We would need you to continue your current arrangement, she said finally. Perhaps expand it. My chest tightened. Arrangement. That was her word for it. Not sacrifice. Not cost. Arrangement. I already work as much as I can, I said quietly. I'm not referring to your jobs, she replied. Of course she wasn't. She never was. After that first meeting years ago, Margaret had introduced me to a different kind of work. Quiet work. Invisible work. I signed documents I barely understood. Agreements tied to properties, investments, things that moved money in ways I couldn't follow. At first, it was simple. Just signatures. Just names. Just trust. You don't need to worry about the details, Margaret had told me. We'll handle everything. And I believed her, because believing her meant Ethan stayed in school. Because believing her meant I could keep my promise. Over time, those arrangements became more complex, more frequent, more necessary. And every time I hesitated, I would think of Ethan, his future, his opportunities, the life I had worked so hard to give him. And I would say yes, always yes. Now, standing in that quiet hallway, I felt the weight of those choices pressing in on me. What would I have to do? I asked. Nothing you haven't done before, Margaret said smoothly. Just a little more involvement, a few additional documents, some extended responsibilities. Responsibilities, another soft word for something that felt anything but soft. And in return, I asked. Ethan gets everything he needs, she replied. The right introductions, the right placement, the right future. I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly feeling weak. Because this was it. This was the moment where the path I had chosen years ago demanded more from me. And I already knew what my answer would be. Okay, I said. There was no hesitation in my voice, because there never was. Good, Margaret replied. I'll have someone contact you with the details. The call ended, and I stood there for a long time staring at the blank screen of my phone, because deep down I knew something had changed. This wasn't just about helping Ethan anymore. This was about maintaining something that had grown beyond my control, something I didn't fully understand, something that could unravel everything if I stepped away. That night, Ethan came home later than usual. He looked tired, but there was a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in a while. Big day, I asked. Yeah, he said, dropping his bag on the floor. Met with someone from a firm Dad knows. Of course. Daniel again. They're interested in me, he continued. Like, really interested. That's wonderful, I said, forcing a smile. Yeah, he nodded. Dad says this is just the beginning. I watched him carefully. Dad says a lot of things, I replied gently. Ethan frowned slightly. He knows what he's talking about, Mom. I didn't argue, because what was the point? I'm proud of you, I said instead. He nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. Thanks. He started to walk toward his room, then paused. Hey, he said, glancing back. You ever think about doing something different, like improving things for yourself? The question caught me off guard. I'm okay, I said. He shrugged. I just mean, you don't have to stay stuck, you know. Stuck. The word lingered in the air long after he disappeared into his room. I stood there in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had made so many decisions for him. Sacrifices he never saw. Choices he never understood. And I realized something that made my chest ache in a way I couldn't quite describe. Ethan believed I had stayed the same, that I had never changed, never grown, never done more. But the truth was I had changed more than he could ever imagine. I had stepped into a world far more complicated than the one he thought I was stuck in. A world where every decision carried a cost. A world where I had traded pieces of myself for his future. And the worst part, he still believed I had given him nothing. The first time I realized how far things had gone was the day someone came looking for me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just after my shift ended at the care facility. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the parking lot as I walked toward the bus stop, already calculating how much time I had before my second job started. That's when I noticed the car. Black, polished, out of place. It was parked just across the street, engine still running. At first, I thought nothing of it, until the door opened. A man stepped out mid-40s, maybe older, well-dressed, composed, the kind of person who didn't waste movements or words. Ms. Harper, he called. I froze. There was something about the way he said my name that made my stomach tighten. Yes, I replied cautiously. He walked toward me, slow, deliberate. My name is Richard Hale, he said, offering a small professional nod. I believe we have mutual connections. I didn't take the step closer he seemed to expect. What do you want? I asked. He studied me for a moment, as if measuring how much I already knew. Margaret Collins asked me to speak with you, he said finally. Of course she did. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. This isn't a good place, he added, glancing around. Perhaps we could talk somewhere more private. Every instinct I had told me to walk away, to say no, to pretend I had nothing to do with any of this. But I didn't, because I already knew there was no walking away anymore. We sat in a quiet cafe a few blocks away. The kind of place where conversations blurred into the background, where no one paid attention to anyone else. Perfect for people like him. Let's not waste time, Richard said once we were seated. You've been assisting with several financial instruments tied to our network, to the background, where no one paid attention to anyone else. Perfect for people like him. Let's not waste time, Richard said once we were seated. You've been assisting with several financial instruments tied to our network. Assisting. Another soft word. I signed what I was told to sign, I replied. Yes, he nodded, and you've done so reliably. There was no praise in his tone, just acknowledgement. But I asked. He leaned forward slightly. But things are expanding, he said. And expansion comes with increased visibility. Visibility. That word felt heavier than all the others. What does that mean? I asked quietly. It means, he said, his voice lowering, that your name is now attached to more than just paperwork. A chill ran through me. I was told everything was handled, I said. It is, he replied, as long as everything continues smoothly. There it was, the condition. the unspoken threat wrapped in calm, measured words. "And if it doesn't?" I asked. Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a thin folder on the table between us. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Inside were documents, my signature, my name, over and over again. Transactions, properties, accounts I didn't recognize. Numbers that made my head spin. "This is just a summary," Richard said. "A small portion of your involvement." My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages. I didn't know I started. "No," he interrupted gently. "You didn't ask." And he was right. I hadn't asked. Because asking might have forced me to see something I wasn't ready to face. "I did this for my son," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure you did," he replied. There was no judgment in his tone, but there was no sympathy either. "Then you understand why it's important to continue," he added. "For his sake." I closed the folder slowly. Because now, it wasn't just about sacrifice. It was about consequences. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Richard leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "There are a few new agreements," he said. "Higher stakes. More significant movements." I swallowed hard. "And if I say no?" For the first time, he smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, just knowingly. "I wouldn't recommend that," he said. Silence settled between us. Heavy, final. Because in that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding for years. I hadn't just stepped into something complicated. I had stepped into something dangerous. And now I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the folder open in front of me, the numbers blurring together as I tried to make sense of it all. How had it gotten this far? How had I gone from signing a few documents to being entangled in something this big? The answer was simple. One yes at a time. One compromise at a time. One sacrifice layered on top of another. All for Ethan. Always for Ethan. And yet he had no idea. He still believed I was small. That I had done nothing. That I had stayed the same. A bitter thought crossed my mind. What would he think if he knew the truth? I pushed it away immediately. No. He could never know. Because this wasn't the kind of truth that brought understanding. This was the kind that destroyed everything. The next morning, Ethan was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. That was rare. He was dressed in a suit sharp tailored, the kind of look that made him seem older than his years. "Big day?" I asked. "Interview," he said. "One of the firms Dad connected me with." "Of course, Daniel again." "You'll do great," I said. He nodded, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the microwave. "Dad says this could change everything," he added. I watched him carefully. "Your life is already changing," I said. "Not enough," he replied quickly. "Not yet." There was a hunger in his voice now. Ambition. Drive. The same things I had once prayed he would have, and now they were pulling him further away. "You ever think about what it took to get you here?" I asked quietly. He glanced at me confused. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. For just a moment, I considered telling him. Not everything. Just something. Enough for him to understand. Enough for him to see me differently. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw it. The certainty in his eyes. The belief that he had built this life on his own, or with the help of people like Daniel. And I knew he wasn't ready for the truth. Nothing I said finally. Just be careful. He frowned slightly, careful of what I forced a small smile, of thinking you got here alone. He didn't respond, just grabbed his bag and headed for the door. "He'll be late," he said. "Okay." The door closed behind him, and I was alone again. But this time, the silence felt different, heavier, because now I wasn't just watching him drift away. I was standing on the edge of something that could pull everything down with it. And the worst part, I had built it myself. The truth has a way of waiting. It doesn't rush. It doesn't force itself into the light. It waits quietly, patiently, until the moment it can no longer be ignored. For me, that moment came in the form of a letter. It arrived on a gray morning, tucked between the usual stack of bills and advertisements. At first glance, it looked ordinary, plain envelope official seal, but the return address made my breath catch. Federal Bureau of Investigation. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands felt cold, unsteady, as if my body already knew what my mind was still trying to deny. Inside was a formal notice. Request for interview regarding financial transactions. My name was listed. Clearly, undeniably. I read it once, then again, and then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less real. But they didn't. They only became heavier, more permanent. I set the letter down slowly, my heart pounding in a rhythm that felt too loud for the quiet kitchen around me. This was it. Everything I had avoided, everything I had pushed aside, everything I had convinced myself was handled was now coming back. Not quietly, not gently, but all at once. I reached for my phone and dialed Margaret. She answered on the second ring. "Justin?" she said, her tone calm as ever. "I was expecting your call." Of course she was. "They contacted me," I said, skipping any form of greeting. "The FBI." A brief pause. Not surprised. Not concerned. Just measured. "Yes," she replied. "We're aware. We—" The word made my stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" I asked. "What's going on?" "It means," she said, her voice steady, "that there's been some attention drawn to certain operations." "Operations?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Margaret, I signed what you told me to sign. I trusted. And that trust has been beneficial for everyone involved," she interrupted smoothly. "Beneficial." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. "They're asking to speak with me," I said. "What am I supposed to do?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Longer this time. We'll provide you with guidance," she said finally. "Legal representation. You won't be alone in this. Alone." That was exactly what I felt. "And if something goes wrong?" I asked quietly. Another pause. Then softly. "It won't if everyone remains consistent." Consistent. I understood what she meant. Say nothing, change nothing. Protect the system, even if it meant risking everything else, including myself. After the call ended, I sat there in silence, the letter still lying on the table like a weight I couldn't lift. I had always known there was a risk, but I had convinced myself it was distant, controlled, manageable. Now it was here, and I couldn't pretend anymore. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. He looked different, excited, energized, like something good had happened. "I got it," he said as soon as he walked in. I looked up. Got what? The internship, he replied, smiling. The one with the firm Dad introduced me to. They offered me a position after graduation, too. For a moment, everything else faded. The letter, the fear, the weight pressing down on me. All of it the internship, he replied, smiling. The one with the firm Dad introduced me to. They offered me a position after graduation, too. For a moment, everything else faded. The letter, the fear, the weight pressing down on me. All of it disappeared. I'm so proud of you, I said, my voice catching slightly. I knew I could do it, he said, his confidence unmistakable. Dad said this was just the start. Of course he did. Ethan stepped further into the kitchen, his eyes bright. This is what I've been working for, he continued. This is how everything changes. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. It is. He paused, studying me. You don't seem as excited as I thought you'd be, he added. I forced a small smile. I am, I said. Just tired. That part at least was true. Tired from what? He asked almost casually. The question hung in the air. Simple, but loaded. I looked at him, really looked at him. And for a moment I saw it clearly. The gap between what he believed and what was real. He thought I had done nothing. That I had stayed in the same place while he moved forward. He didn't see the cost, didn't see the choices, didn't see the line I had crossed over and over again to keep him where he was. Life, I said finally. Just life. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. And maybe he never would. Unless... No. I pushed the thought away, because telling him the truth now wouldn't fix anything. It would only break what little remained between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the letter, not because of the fear, but because of the realization that everything was about to come to a head. The life I had built for Ethan, the choices I had made, the secrets I had kept. They were all connected. And if one piece fell, everything else would follow. The next day, I met with the lawyer Margaret had arranged. His name was Thomas Green. Sharp, controlled, efficient. The kind of man who spoke in precise terms, leaving no room for misunderstanding. You need to understand your position, he said, reviewing the documents in front of him. I'm trying to, I replied. You're listed on multiple transactions, he continued. Your signature is present. That makes you visible. Visible. That word again. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means, he said, looking up at me, that you need to be very careful about what you say and to whom. I swallowed hard. And if I don't? He didn't answer directly, but I didn't need him to, because I already knew. By the time I left his office, one thing was clear. I was no longer just someone making sacrifices for my son. I was part of something that could destroy everything. And the worst part? Ethan was standing right in the middle of the future I had built without knowing how fragile it really was. That evening, I sat across from him at the dinner table. Really sat. For the first time in a long time. I need to ask you something, I said. He looked up, slightly surprised. Okay. If things weren't exactly how you thought they were, I began slowly. Would you want to know? He frowned. What do you mean? I hesitated. This was it. The edge. The moment where everything could change. Nothing, I said finally, shaking my head. Forget it. He stared at me for a second longer, then shrugged. All right. And just like that, the moment passed. The truth stayed where it had always been. Hidden. Buried. Waiting. But not for much longer. The day everything began to unravel didn't feel dramatic at first. There were no sirens, no sudden knocks on the door, no loud, obvious signs that my life was about to see lit in two. It was quiet. Almost. The day everything began to unravel didn't feel dramatic at first. There were no sirens, no sudden knocks on the door, no loud, obvious signs that my life was about to split in two. It was quiet, almost ordinary, which somehow made it worse. I was on my way home from work, standing on the bus, holding onto the metal pole as the city blurred past the windows. My mind was elsewhere, as it had been for days, cycling through the same thoughts over and over again. The letter, the meeting, the documents, the realization that I wasn't as invisible as I had once believed. When my phone buzzed, I nearly ignored it, but something made me check. Unknown number. I hesitated for a second, then answered. Hello, Ms. Harper, a calm, professional voice said. Yes, this is Special Agent Karen Mitchell with the FBI. We sent you a notice earlier this week regarding a request for an interview. My chest tightened instantly. Yes, I said, gripping the pole a little tighter. I received it. I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you, she continued. As soon as possible. The words were polite, measured, but there was no mistaking the urgency beneath them. I have a lawyer, I said quickly. Of course, she replied. You're welcome to have legal representation present. This is a voluntary interview for now. For now. 2 words, and suddenly the bus felt too small. Too crowded. I understand, I said quietly. We agreed on a time. The next morning, when the call ended, I stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. The next morning, there was no more time to think, no more time to pretend. Everything I had done was about to be questioned, examined, pulled apart, and I had no idea how much they already knew. That night, Ethan didn't come home, at least not before I fell asleep. He had texted earlier something about a dinner with his father and a few people from the firm. Big opportunity, he had written. Don't wait up. I didn't. Not this time. Because I couldn't. Because my mind was somewhere else entirely. The next morning came too quickly. I barely slept, barely ate, barely felt like myself as I got dressed in the simplest clothes I could find. Something neutral, something that wouldn't draw attention. As if that mattered. As if anything about me was still invisible. Thomas Green met me outside the federal building. You understand the importance of this meeting, he said as we walked in. Yes, I replied. Answer only what is asked. He continued. Nothing more, nothing less. I nodded. Do not speculate, do not guess, and most importantly, do not contradict prior statements. Prior statements. Everything I had signed. Everything tied to my name. Okay, I said. But inside, I wasn't okay. Inside, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. The interview room was smaller than I expected. Simple, neutral, a table, a few chairs, nothing else. Agent Mitchell was already there. She stood as we entered, extending her hand. Ms. Harper, she said. I shook it. Her grip was firm, steady. Thank you for coming in. I sat down, my hands folded tightly in my lap. This won't take too long, she added, taking her seat across from me. That was the first thing she said, and somehow it made everything feel longer, more drawn out, more inevitable. She opened a folder, Not the same one Richard had shown me, but similar. Filled with pages. With my name. We've been reviewing a series of financial transactions connected to several properties and investment accounts, she began. Your name appears on multiple documents. I nodded slowly. I signed what I was told to sign, I said. By whom, she asked. The question came quickly, directly. I hesitated, just for a second. Advisors? I replied carefully. People managing the accounts. Names, she asked. I felt Thomas shift slightly beside me, a silent reminder. Careful. I don't remember all of them, I said. Agent Mitchell studied me. Not harshly, but closely, like she was looking for something beneath the surface. You don't remember? She repeated. No. Another pause. Then she turned a page. What about Margaret Collins? My heart skipped. There it was. The name I had been avoiding. The name tied to everything. I know her, I said. In what capacity she helped facilitate opportunities for my son? I replied. Financial opportunities, she clarified. Yes. Agent Mitchell nodded slowly, making a note. And in exchange? The question hung in the air. Heavy, sharp. I don't understand, I said. Her eyes met mine, steady, unblinking. Ms. Harper, she said gently, nothing in these transactions is free. I swallowed hard. I trusted her, I said. That's not what I asked, she replied. Silence filled the room, thick, uncomfortable. Because she was right. She hadn't asked about trust. She had asked about cost. And the truth? The truth was something I had spent years avoiding. I signed documents, I said finally. That's all. Agent Mitchell leaned back slightly. That's not all, she said. And then she turned the folder toward me. Inside were pages I had never seen before. Detailed records, amounts, transfers, connections, all tied back to me. This is what we have so far, she said. My breath caught, because for the first time I was seeing it clearly. Not as pieces, not as fragments, but as a whole. And it was bigger than I had ever imagined. I didn't know, I whispered. Agent Mitchell watched me carefully. That may be true, she said. But it doesn't change your involvement. Involvement. That word hit harder than all the others. Because it didn't matter what I knew, or didn't know. I was part of it, and now I had to decide what that meant. For me, for my future, for Ethan. When the interview ended, I felt like a different person walking out of that room. Not lighter, not relieved, just aware. Aware of how deep I was in. Aware of how close everything was to falling apart. And most of all, aware that the truth wasn't just waiting anymore. It was coming. Whether I was ready or not. That evening, I walked into the house and found Ethan sitting at the table. That alone was unusual. But what struck me more was the look on his face. Serious, focused, different. We need to talk, he said. My heart sank, because somehow I knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could keep the truth hidden anymore. I know about the investigation. Ethan's words landed before I even had the chance to sit down. I froze halfway across the kitchen. The air felt different, heavier, like something had already broken and we were both just now stepping into the pieces. What do you mean? I asked carefully. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pushed something across the table toward me. An article, printed, highlighted. I didn't need to read the whole thing to understand. Words jumped out at me immediately. Financial network under investigation. Real estate fronts. shell transactions, multiple individuals involved. And then, a name, Margaret Collins. My chest tightened. I saw it this morning. Ethan said, his voice controlled but strained. Dad sent it to me. Of course he did. Daniel never missed an opportunity to position himself as the one who knew things first. And then Ethan continued, his eyes locking onto mine. I started connecting some dots. My heart began to pound. What dots? I asked. He let out a short, humorless breath. You think I don't notice things, he said. The calls, the meetings, the way you've been acting lately. I stayed silent, because this wasn't something I could talk my way out of. Not anymore. You've been hiding something, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion. Yes, I said quietly. The word hung in the air between us. Simple. Honest. Too late. Ethan's jaw tightened. For how long? He asked. I swallowed. Years. That was the truth. And saying it out loud made it real in a way it had never been before. He shook his head slightly, like he was trying to process something that didn't quite fit. Years, he repeated. His eyes dropped to the article again. To this, he asked. I didn't answer right away, because how do you explain something like that? How do you take years of silent decisions and compress them into something someone else can understand? It didn't start like that, I said finally. Ethan looked up again. Then how did it start? He asked. There it was, the question I had been avoiding for so long, the one that would change everything. I took a slow breath. It started with you, I said. His expression hardened instantly. Don't do that, he snapped. Don't try to turn this into... I'm not, I interrupted softly. I'm telling you the truth. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. Then explain it, he said. Because right now, it looks like you got involved in something illegal and didn't bother telling me. Illegal. The word hit hard, but I didn't correct him, because from where he was standing, that's exactly what it looked like. When you got into that school, I began slowly. We couldn't afford it. He frowned. I know that, he said. But you got help. Scholarship's not enough. I said. He stopped, listening now. Really listening. For the first year I managed, I continued. I worked more hours, took on extra shifts. I found ways to make it work. And after that, he asked. I hesitated. After that, someone offered me help. Margaret, he said. Yes. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. And you just accepted? No, I said. I asked questions. I made sure it was safe. That part wasn't entirely true. But it wasn't entirely false either. At least, I thought I did. He stared at me. And what did she want in return? He asked. I looked down at the table. My name. I said quietly. My signature. My cooperation. For what he pressed. Financial documents, I replied. Investments. Properties. Things I didn't fully understand at the time. Ethan let out a sharp breath. So you just signed things without knowing what they were? I trusted her, I said. And that makes it okay, he shot back. No, I said immediately. It doesn't. Silence filled the room, heavy, tense, because this wasn't a simple conversation. This wasn't something that could be fixed with the right words. This is serious, Mom, he said finally, his voice lower now. This isn't just some mistake. I know, I said. Do you? He asked, frustration creeping back in. Because it doesn't sound like you do. I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something different. Not just judgment, not just distance, but fear. "You think I wanted this?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. "You think I woke up one day and decided to get involved in something like this?" I continued. "I don't know what you were thinking," he said. "I was thinking about you," I said. The words came out stronger than I expected, and they landed. I could see it, a flicker of something in his expression, something uncertain. "You always say that," he muttered. "Because it's true," I said. He shook his head again. "That doesn't explain this," he said, gesturing toward the article. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." Another pause, longer this time. "Then Dad says you should get a lawyer," Ethan said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "I already have one," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. Because if this gets worse, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to, because we both knew what he was implying. Consequences. Real ones. The kind that don't go away. The kind that change everything. "I'm handling it," I said. "Are you?" he asked. There it was again. Doubt. Not just in the situation, but in me. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. "I've been handling things for a long time," I said quietly. He didn't respond, just looked at me like he was trying to see something he had never noticed before. Something beyond the version of me he had already decided was true. "You should have told me," he said finally. "I know," I replied. "And you didn't," he added. "No," I said. Another silence, but this one felt different, less sharp, more uncertain, because for the first time the story he believed was starting to crack. Just a little. "I don't understand why you didn't just say something," he said. I gave a small, tired smile. "Because I didn't want you to see me like this," I said. "Like what?" he asked. I hesitated. "Complicated," I replied. He let out a breath. "That's not the word I'd use," he said. I nodded. "I know." The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't as heavy, because something had shifted. Not everything. Not yet. But something. "Is it bad?" he asked after a moment. The question was softer now. Less accusatory. More human. I didn't lie. "Yes," I said. He swallowed. "How bad?" I looked at the article again, at the words, at the reality I could no longer avoid. "I don't know yet," I admitted. And that was the truth, the most honest thing I had said all day. Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. For once, he didn't have an answer, didn't have a plan, didn't have something his father had told him. Just uncertainty, just reality. And for the first time in a long time, we were standing in the same place, even if neither of us knew what would happen next. That night, after our conversation ended, Ethan didn't go to his room right away. He stayed. That alone felt unfamiliar. He stood near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular, like his mind was trying to rearrange everything he thought he knew into something that made sense. I didn't interrupt him. Some silences need space, and this one was carrying too much. Finally, he spoke. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" His voice wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't accusing. It was something else. Something quieter. I took a slow breath before answering. "Because I didn't want you to carry it," I said. He looked at me. What does that even mean? He asked. It means, I continued choosing my words carefully, that I wanted you to focus on your life, not on how hard it was to build it. He frowned slightly. But it's my life, he said. Don't I deserve to know what it cost? The question hit deeper than he probably intended. Because the honest answer, yes, he did. But not like this. Not with everything already falling apart around us. I thought if you didn't see the struggle, I said slowly, you wouldn't feel limited by it. Ethan shook his head. That doesn't make sense, he said. You think hiding things makes them disappear? No, I replied softly. I think hiding things makes them easier to carry for a while. He let out a breath, pacing a few steps across the kitchen. For you, he said. Not for me. I didn't argue, because he wasn't wrong. Silence had protected him, but it had also built a wall between us, one I didn't know how to tear down anymore. And all this time, he continued, stopping and turning back toward me. You just let me believe that you didn't do anything. There it was. The truth he had been holding on to. The belief that had shaped everything between us. I didn't let you believe it, I said quietly. You didn't stop me either, he shot back. I nodded. That's true. He stared at me, frustration rising again, but this time it was mixed with something else. Confusion. Because the story he had built in his mind didn't match what he was hearing now. Why? He asked. Why would you just accept that? I looked at him for a long moment. Because this was the part he wouldn't understand easily. I needed you to succeed, I said. That's not an answer, he said. It is, I replied gently. Just not the one you want. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to keep up with everything. I worked for what I have, he said. I studied. I pushed myself. I know, I interrupted softly. And I'm proud of you for that. Then don't act like it was all because of you, he said. The words came out fast, defensive, almost instinctive, and I felt them, not as an attack, but as a reflection of everything he had believed for years. I'm not saying it was all because of me, I said calmly. Then what are you saying? He demanded. I hesitated, because this was the line, the one I had been walking toward since the moment he found out. I'm saying I began slowly, that the path you walked didn't appear out of nowhere. He went still. You think I don't know that? He said. I think, I replied carefully, that you don't know how much was done to make that path possible. Silence. Heavy, because now we were getting closer to something real. You're talking about money, he said finally. Yes. And these people, he added, gesturing toward the article again. Yes. Ethan let out a breath. So everything I have is connected to this? He asked. The question lingered. Sharp. Unavoidable. I didn't lie. Some of it I said. That was enough. I saw it in his face. The moment something inside him shifted. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to crack the certainty he had been holding on to. So what happens now? He asked. I looked down at my hands. For me, I said, I deal with the consequences. And for me, he pressed. I looked back up at him. For you, nothing has to change, I said. He stared at me like I had just said something impossible. How can you say that? He asked. If this gets worse, if you get in trouble, I'll handle it, I said. You can't just handle something like this, he snapped. I've handled everything so far, I replied. And look where that got you, he shot back. The words landed hard, but this time, I didn't flinch, because he wasn't wrong. I had handled everything, quietly, alone, and now it had led me here. I'm not asking you to understand everything I said softly. I'm asking you to focus on your life. He shook his head again. No, he said. I'm not doing that anymore. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He continued, stepping closer to the table. I'm not just going to sit back and pretend this doesn't affect me. It doesn't have to, I said. But it does, he replied. You're my mother. He continued, stepping closer to the table. I'm not just going to sit back and pretend this doesn't affect me. It doesn't have to, I said. But it does, he replied. You're my mother. The words hung in the air. Simple, but powerful. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't distancing himself from me. He was stepping closer. I need to know what's going on, he said. I hesitated. Because the truth, the full truth, wasn't something I could just hand to him, not without consequences, not without pulling him into something I had spent years trying to keep him out of. There are things you don't need to know, I said. That's not your decision anymore, he replied firmly. The room fell quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Because the balance had shifted. He wasn't the same boy who pushed me away. And I wasn't the same woman who stayed silent. We were standing in a new space now. One where the truth was no longer optional. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if protecting him meant staying quiet or finally telling him everything. There are moments in life when you realize there's no more space left for half-truths. No more room for silence. No more way to protect someone without finally letting them see everything. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because I was done being afraid. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made every impossible decision over the years, and I looked at the folders in front of me. Every document, every signature, every quiet choice I had made. For him. Always for him. By the time the sun came up, I had made one final decision. I wasn't going to hide anymore. Not from the law, not from the truth, and not from my son. Ethan came downstairs just after 8. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. There was something different about him now. Less certain, less controlled, more human. Did you stay up all night? He asked when he saw me. Yes, I said. He nodded slowly, glancing at the papers on the table. What is all that? He asked. The truth, I replied. That got his attention. He walked closer, hesitating slightly before sitting down across from me. I could see it in his eyes. Part of him wanted to know. Part of him wasn't ready. I'm going to tell you everything, I said. He swallowed. Okay. I took a deep breath, and then I started. I told him about the first meeting with Margaret, about the money we didn't have, about the way I had sat at this very table staring at numbers that didn't add up, knowing that one decision could change everything. I told him about the first document I signed, how simple it felt, how harmless, how necessary. I told him how it grew, slowly, quietly, one agreement turning into another, one favor turning into a pattern, until it became something I couldn't step away from anymore. Ethan didn't interrupt, not once. He just listened, and the longer I spoke, the more his expression changed. Not just shock, not just anger, but something deeper, understanding, or at least the beginning of it. I didn't know how far it would go, I said finally. I didn't know it would become this. He leaned back in his chair, running both hands through his hair. This is serious, he said quietly. I know. You could go to prison, he added. The word hung there, heavy, real. Yes, I said. He really looked at me for a long moment, and then he asked the question I had been waiting for. Why didn't you stop? I didn't hesitate this time, because of you. He closed his eyes. Don't say that like it fixes anything, he said. I'm not saying it to fix anything, I replied. I'm saying it because it's the truth. He shook his head again. But this, he gestured toward the papers, toward everything. This is too much. I know. Then why keep going? He asked. And this time, I answered differently. Because by the time I realized how far it had gone, stopping wasn't simple anymore. That was the part he needed to understand. This wasn't a single decision. It was a chain. And once you're in the middle of it, walking away has consequences too. Someone came to see me, I added. Ethan frowned. Who, Richard Hale? I said. He made it clear that leaving wasn't really an option. And once you're in the middle of it, walking away has consequences too. Someone came to see me, I added. Ethan frowned. Who? Richard Hale, I said. He made it clear that leaving wasn't really an option. Ethan's expression darkened. They threatened you? He asked. Not directly, I replied. But they didn't have to. Silence settled between us again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything that had finally been said. And now, he asked. I looked at him. I'm going to tell the truth, I said. His eyes widened slightly. To the FBI? He said. Yes. He leaned forward. Mom, you can't just... I can, I said calmly. And I will. Do you understand what that means? He asked. For you? For everything? Yes, I said, because I did. More than he realized. It means I take responsibility. I continued. For my choices. For my actions. And what about me? He asked. There it was. The question beneath all the others. The one he hadn't asked yet. What about your future? I said softly. He nodded. Yes. I held his gaze. Your future isn't built on this, I said. It never was. That's not what you said before, he replied. I said some of the path was made possible by what I did. I corrected gently. Not that it defines who you are. He didn't respond. Because now, he wasn't arguing. He was thinking. I don't want you carrying this, I added. You already made that decision for me once, he said. He wasn't wrong, and this time, I didn't deny it. You're right, I said. I did. He looked surprised by that. So what now? He asked. Now, I said, you get to decide what kind of man you want to be. The words settled slowly, not as pressure, but as truth. I'm going to tell them everything, I continued. And whatever happens after that, happens. Ethan stared at me for a long time, and then something shifted. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough. You really did all of this for me, he asked quietly. There was no accusation in his voice this time, just disbelief. And something else, something softer. Yes, I said. He swallowed, and for the first time in years, I saw it. Not judgment, Not distance, not disappointment, but something I had been waiting to see for so long. Respect, mixed with something even deeper, something closer to understanding. "I didn't know," he said. "I know," I replied. And in that moment, the truth didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of distance. It didn't undo the choices I had made. But it did something else. It gave him the chance to finally see me, not as someone who failed, but as someone who fought, even when no one was watching. The morning I walked into the federal building for the second time, I wasn't the same person. The first time, I had walked in afraid, careful, holding on to fragments of a story that no longer made sense. This time, I walked in with the truth. And that made all the difference. Ethan insisted on coming with me. "I'm not letting you do this alone," he said. There was no hesitation in his voice this time. No distance. No doubt about where he stood. I didn't argue, because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to carry everything by myself. We didn't say much on the drive, but we didn't need to. There was something quiet between us now. Not perfect, not healed, but real. And sometimes that's where healing begins. Inside the building, everything felt the same neutral walls, the same quiet tension in the air. But I wasn't the same. Agent Mitchell greeted us again. Her expression shifted slightly when she saw Ethan standing beside me. "Ms. Harper," she said. "And you are my son," I replied. She nodded once. "Understood. Let's proceed." This time when we sat down, I didn't wait for the questions. "I want to cooperate," I said. The words came out steady, clear, certain. Agent Mitchell paused, studying me. "In what way?" she asked. "In every way," I replied. "I'm ready to tell you everything." I felt Ethan shift slightly beside me, not in fear, but in support, and that gave me strength. The next few hours were a blur of details, names, dates, documents. Conversations I had tried to forget now laid out piece by piece. I told them about Margaret, about Richard, about the structure of everything I had been pulled into. I didn't minimize. I didn't hide. I didn't protect anything except one thing: the truth. At one point, Agent Mitchell leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "You understand the implications of this," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You're placing yourself at significant legal risk." "I already am," I said. That was the reality. And for the first time, I wasn't running from it. When it was over, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not exactly, but release. Like I had finally set something down that I had been carrying for too long. Outside, Ethan and I stood on the steps of the building. The sun was bright, almost too bright after everything inside. "So what happens now?" he asked. I looked out at the city for a moment. "At this point," I said slowly, "it's out of my hands." He nodded. "And you're okay with that?" he asked. I turned to him. "Yes," I said, because I was. For the first time in a long time, I had done something without fear guiding me, and that mattered. The next few weeks were uncertain. There were more meetings, more conversations with lawyers, more waiting than I thought I could handle. But something had changed. Not just in the situation, but in us. Ethan started coming home more often, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. We talked. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. And slowly the distance between us began to close. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, he said something I hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about everything," he said. I looked up. "Yeah." He nodded. "I used to think success was just about getting ahead," he said. "About doing whatever it took to move forward." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. But now he added, "I think it matters how you get there too." I felt something tighten in my chest, in the best way. "That's a hard lesson," I said. "Yeah," he replied. "But I guess I had a pretty intense example." There was a small, almost hesitant smile on his face. Not mocking, not judgmental, just real. "I'm sorry," I said. "For what?" he asked. "For putting you in this position," I replied. "For not trusting you with the truth sooner." He was quiet for a moment. Then, sorry too," he said. I blinked, surprised. "For what?" "For thinking you did nothing," he said. For not even considering that there might be more to your story." The words hit deeper than anything else had. Because this was what I had been waiting for. Not forgiveness, not validation, just might be more to your story. The words hit deeper than anything else had. Because this was what I had been waiting for. Not forgiveness, not validation, just understanding. "You didn't know," I said. "I could have asked," he replied. We sat in silence for a moment, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Months later, the case finally reached a resolution. I won't pretend it was easy, or that there weren't consequences. There were. Real ones, legal ones, the kind that don't disappear. But because I cooperated, because I told the truth, because I stopped running, the outcome wasn't as devastating as it could have been. And more importantly, it didn't define the rest of our lives. Ethan graduated. He took the job, but he made his own path. Not his father's. Not built on assumptions, but built on something stronger. Clarity, choice, and integrity. One evening, not long after everything settled, he sat across from me again at the same kitchen table. But this time, everything felt different. "You know," he said, "I used to think you failed me." I smiled slightly. "I know." He shook his head. "I was wrong," he said. I didn't respond right away, because I wanted to hear the rest. "You didn't fail me," he continued. "You sacrificed for me, in ways I didn't understand." My chest tightened, and even when it got complicated, he added, "You still chose to do the right thing in the end." I looked at him. In the end. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw it. Not just understanding, not just respect, but something deeper. Pride. "I wish I had done it sooner," I said. "Maybe," he replied. "But if you had, I wouldn't have learned what I needed to learn." There it was. The final piece. Not perfect, not clean, but meaningful. And sometimes that's enough. I spent years believing I had to carry everything alone, that protecting someone meant hiding the truth, that sacrifice had to be silent to be real. But I was wrong, because the truth doesn't destroy love, it reveals it, even when it's messy, even when it's painful, even when it comes too late. And in the end, my son didn't see me as someone who failed him. He saw me as someone who fought for him, even when the cost was more than I should have paid. And that was enough. Sometimes the people we love the most don't see the battles we fight for them. They see the results. They see the outcomes. But they don't always see the quiet sacrifices made in the background. The late nights, the hard choices, the moments where we choose them over ourselves again and again. And when that happens, it's easy to feel misunderstood, to feel unseen, to feel like everything you've done didn't matter. But the truth is, it does matter, even if it's not recognized right away, even if it's misunderstood, even if it takes time and pain and honesty to finally bring it to light. But here's the important part. Sacrifice alone isn't enough. Because when we sacrifice without honesty, we risk building something fragile, something that can break the moment the truth comes out. Real strength isn't just in what we give, it's in knowing when to be honest, when to trust the people we love with the full story, when to let them see us not as perfect, not as strong all the time, but as perfect, not as strong all the time, but as real. Because that's where true connection lives, not in perfection, not in silence, but in truth. So, if you've ever felt like someone misunderstood your efforts, or if you've ever judged someone without knowing their full story as real, because that's where true connection lives, not in perfection, not in silence, but in truth. So, if you've ever felt like someone misunderstood your efforts, or if you've ever judged someone without knowing their full story, take a moment, look deeper, ask questions, and most importantly, be honest. Because sometimes the truth doesn't break relationships, it saves them. If this story touched you in any way, I'd really love to hear from you. Have you ever misunderstood someone close to you, or been misunderstood yourself? Share your story in the comments. And if you're watching this from somewhere in the world, let me know where you are and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing where these stories travel. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. You're not alone in what you feel. Sometimes the deepest truths in life are the ones we don't see until everything begins to fall apart. We often judge others based on what's visible, their choices, their outcomes, their silence. But behind that silence, there can be years of sacrifice, fear, and love that was never meant to be seen. And sometimes, the people we think failed us were the very ones carrying the heaviest burden for us all along. This story reminds us that love isn't always perfect. It doesn't always come in the right form at the right time or with the right decisions. Sometimes love makes mistakes. Sometimes it chooses the wrong path for the right reason. But what truly defines a person is not just what they've done. It's what they choose to do when the truth finally stands in front of them. It takes courage to be honest when everything is at risk. It takes strength to admit you were wrong. And it takes even more love to finally see someone not as who you thought they were, but as who they truly are. So before you judge someone, look deeper. Before you walk away, ask questions. And before you assume you know the whole story, remember that some of the most important chapters are the ones never spoken out loud. If this story touched your heart, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever misunderstood someone you love, or been misunderstood yourself? Leave a comment and share your experience. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to subscribe so we can keep telling them together.